Hey guys, Pater Franson here from christiangeekcentral.com and Spirit Blade Productions. Here to give you my thoughts on Labyrinth of Galleria, the Moon Society. I love grid-based, turn-based, party-based, just the dungeons, dungeon crawls with serious visual aesthetics, no anime designs, no monster collecting, no real-time combat elements, as few puzzles as possible. It's a very specific recipe, and there's not many games, honestly, that do it for me. I just want that feeling of uncovering and auto-mapping the dungeon while I fight enemies for XP and loot and feel myself getting stronger, my party members getting stronger and learning new abilities. The kings in the genre for me are Elminage Original and Deep Sky Derelicts, which are kind of two out-of-the-weeds gems that not many people have ever heard of, but that are my favorites in that very, very specific type of game. I played over 25 hours of Labyrinth of Refrain Coven of Dusk and had a great time with that. Other games that I liked even more did kind of whisk me away from it, but while reviewing Labyrinth of Galleria, the Moon Society, I was reminded of all the things that I loved about the first game, along with some of the things that I found frustrating. So I'm going to share those thoughts with you now, and I do want to thank the developer and publisher of Labyrinth of Galleria for providing me with a review copy. On the game's official website, Labyrinth of Galleria the Moon Society is described as a, quote, spiritual successor to Labyrinth of Refrain, unquote. I think of a spiritual successor as a game with no direct ties to its inspiration, but one made in the spirit of the material it's based on. Now, I don't know if that's the technical definition or if there is a technical definition, but that's the impression I get from that terminology. In my mind, spiritual successors have major common elements to the original, but are still very much a new experience, and usually not having any official ties to the source of inspiration. I've only played 5 hours so far, so my thoughts should be considered first impressions, but Labyrinth of Galleria the Moon Society seems much more like a straight traditional sequel to me. Perhaps in the way that Final Fantasy games are sequels in a series with no common story, no continuity connecting them, but they're still sequential games in a series. I have not found Moon Society to be innovative enough in its aesthetics or mechanisms to remove it at all from official sequel status, and that lack of change is both good and bad for me at times. Let me talk about the new features compared to at least my experience playing the first 25 hours of Labyrinth of Refrain. Probably the biggest new feature is tutorials, which the first game had, but tutorials that you can re-watch in your menus. You could not do them. You watched them and then they were gone forever in Labyrinth of Refrain. At least I could never figure out how to watch them again anywhere. And so this game actually, because of its similarities and the tutorials that I can rewatch, was actually teaching me again how to play Labyrinth of Refrain, which after putting it down and coming back to it with all the systems in these games, I was like, oh my gosh, I don't know if I can figure this stuff out. So those tutorials that you could watch and that would allow you to rewatch them, man, that's a huge deal. You can also unlock the ability to have notes automatically taken about key elements in the game. So if you run across a chest and it needs such and such a key, it will automatically, once you unlock this ability, leave a note saying you need this key to unlock this chest. And so then when you look at the map and wonder, why haven't I unlocked that treasure chest yet? It tells you exactly in the notes why. And then you also, soon after that, in the early hours of the game, can unlock the ability to leave your own notes on the maps of the dungeon. This is a huge deal. Now, I'm not always going to feel like leaving notes for myself because it's a bit cumbersome to type them in on a console, which is what I'm playing on PS5. But just still having that ability, that's a huge deal and a major point of improvement to my experience. There are some minor new gameplay mechanics, but honestly they get lost in the sea of mechanical complexity already in this game. But don't let that scare you. As with Labyrinth of Refrain, in Labyrinth of Galleria, you get the option early on to set dungeons into an easier difficulty mode if you want, and you can also just choose to grind and then brute force your way instead of learning to leverage every mechanic at your disposal. Again, I don't know how well that's going to work deeper into the game, but I've heard one or two respected gaming outlets report that difficulties does not need to deter anyone intimidated by deep game systems, as far as the first game, Labyrinth of Refrain, is concerned. So instead, they're rather there there for those who really want them, really want to dive in, and maybe ratchet up the difficulty, which is also an option that you get in the game. And with tutorials, that I can rewatch anytime I want, I'm much more interested this time around in learning all of those systems. There are some nice quality of life improvements, as I said, but there's still so much that does feel like really Monster Hunter type of complexity in terms of its systems, and wiki requiring, in needing to kind of like go over and do some research on my PC and then take my chair back to my console and play some more. But I mean, I think I would recommend this one over Labyrinth of Refrain, unless you're confident you're going to stick with Labyrinth of Refrain, or will be content to do online research to take full advantage of the systems that the game offers. Of course, the alternative is grinding a lot more and using the easy dungeon difficulty. Once again, the story is something that I merely tolerate, and I turn off voice acting so I can race through the dialogue scenes told in a visual novel style with anime characters. I just blaze through those as fast as possible, so I never have to hear that particular style of voice acting that comes with anime. But even racing through them, reading as fast as I can, the cutscenes between missions go on too long for me. I just had 2 back-to-back that were 4 minutes each while speed reading, and so that was like close to 10 minutes waiting to just get back to what I'm playing this game for, and scenes that also spend time on trivial, unfunny bits that I just have no appreciation for. I think your mileage is certainly going to vary. It depends on if you like quote-unquote funny anime. And while not constant so far, the sexually themed content might be making a comeback based on one scene in which a boy who turns his back to a girl to pee, then turns to face her again without zipping up, knowing full well what he was doing. So the tone appears to be once again making light now and then. It's not a constant thing, but making light now and then of what amounts to sexual abuse and harassment. Thankfully, you once again have your quest objective easily available to review at a glance, so carefully absorbing these story sequences doesn't seem to be required. Monster designs have simple, almost Flash-like animations that help give them personality, and they are also more serious looking to me than the cutscene character designs, or at least have a blend of cute and creepy. Again, I would compare it to a Tim Burton type of philosophy. Not a style that's like Tim Burton's, but the philosophy of blending cute and creepy is at play here. Also in the musical score, and I found that kind of endearing and interesting on both the audio and the visual level. So when I'm crawling the dungeons, which is by far the majority of the experience, I'm mostly happy with the aesthetic choices. And while I don't like the occasional chibi representation of your party members bursting into the fray to attack your enemies, my tolerance for that gimmick has been improving since the time I spent with Labyrinth of Refrain and coming to Galleria now. And I still really like the snappy blink and you'll miss them animation for attacks and for spells. Again, this is how you do turn-based combat in my opinion. Quick action animations and no real-time elements so that the battles flow as quickly or slowly as your mind does, so that you're less likely to be bored when there are easy fights that you can just blaze through, and you don't feel under time pressure when you want to take your time with more tactical fights as they show up. There are, lots of elements to the mechanics of combat that'll be, I think, familiar to people that have played JRPGs and other grid-based, turn-based dungeon crawls. There's role placement that's relevant. Characters have favored weapons. There are individual character class abilities. There are coven abilities, or basically squad abilities is what covens are. Damage types and elemental weaknesses, status effects. Much of it, again, I think is going to feel familiar to fans of turn-based JRPGs, but the game uses lots of terminology to describe these things that often feel new for the sake of being new, like donum points instead of mana points, and mana instead of a more common name for what is essentially currency to buy upgrades with. The non-intuitive word choices representing game mechanics still seem like a very unnecessary hurdle for those wanting to learn the game, but are more, I would say, of a mild nuisance than a true obstacle, especially with the new tutorials and the returning difficulty options that allow you to learn the various facets of the game really at your own pace. Oh yeah, facets. Facets is the name for character classes in this game. Okay, whatever. I would recommend if you're new to this franchise, to watch my review of Labyrinth of Refrain, watch other reviews of Labyrinth of Refrain. There's not a ton of them, but there are enough, I think, to give you a sense of whether or not you might want to pull the trigger on one of the games in this series so far. Because I think watching reviews on Labyrinth of Refrain are going to give you a good idea of what Galleria has to offer. They're both very similar. So you might be asking, well, given that, which one should I start with? Well, Labyrinth of Refrain is probably cheaper right now with more help resources online since it's been around longer. So if you get stuck knowing how to progress, which I did run into now and then with Refrain, that can be helpful. But it also needs more help resources online, I think, because of its lack of rewatchable tutorials. That may not be as much of a factor if you get into Refrain and really stick with it so that the things you learn in the tutorials when they pop up remain fresh in your mind and you apply them and they get ingrained into you as you're learning the game because you're just being consistent in playing it. But if you're not planning on mainlining your experience with one of these games, Galleria, it's going to be more expensive because it's new, but if you plan to kind of bounce away from it and you like to bounce back and forth between other games and just go where your interests carry you, you might really want to consider Galleria over Refrain because of that option to rewatch tutorials. Coming back to a game like this after a few months, yeah, you can, dial it down to the easiest difficulty, but then you might, as I do when I find myself having to do that, feel like, but I'm missing out on what this game has to offer. It's not too difficult, I'm getting through it just fine, but I'm missing out on the meat and potatoes of what the designers want to offer me in this game. And for that, I think those rewatchable tutorials seems like such a basic feature that they ought to patch into the first game. But man, they really make a difference if you're going to be bouncing back in and out, of these games. So maybe decide in advance how much you plan to really stick with it. Maybe let that help you, along with watching a lot of reviews. Maybe let that help you determine which of these games that you want to play first or try first. All that said, Labyrinth of Galleria, The Moon Society is available for $50 on Steam, Switch, PS4, and PS5. I hope some of these thoughts have been helpful to you. As always, I would love to get your comments and reactions in the comments below. Please like, share, subscribe, click that bell to stay connected. Anything else you want to do to share this content, I'd really appreciate. And as always, go check out, please, christiangeekcentral.com. See all the content there along with our podcast, and join us as we continue to geek out and seek the truth. For more chat about geek entertainment, answers to your questions, and news from the wider world of Christian geekery, get the Christian Geek Central podcast today on iTunes and other podcast services.